What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the very first episode of Cooking with Coach. I'm so excited that I get to do this. It is something that I'm super passionate about. Food is something that I'm super passionate about. I love being in the kitchen and I love cooking. It's extremely therapeutic and I love sharing all of the fruits of my labor on social media. But now I get an opportunity to actually show you how to make these foods. So exciting. So today we're gonna take two of my favorite things and hopefully two of your favorite things, which is chicken nuggets and salmon, and I'm gonna be making salmon nuggets. I know, I'm crazy, right? But this recipe kind of came about when I only had salmon and I really wanted something that was crunchy, and I wanted something that felt like it was unhealthy and guiltful, but it was extremely healthy, and I had no guilt afterwards because we are also not frying these, we are putting them in the air fryer. But we're gonna go ahead and get started with our wet ingredients. So the first thing that you're gonna need with your wet is you're gonna need an egg and some Dijon mustard. So I have Dijon mustard right here, and then I have one egg right here that I'm gonna be mixing into a bowl, and I'm just gonna be whisking them together. If you find that you don't have enough wet, which you're really not gonna need a lot of wet because you don't wanna overcoat your salmon, you can always add just a smidge of water just to make it a little looser. But I like mine thick because I love the flavor of the mustard on my salmon. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. Let me just get this. I'm gonna crack our egg like so. Get rid of that. And then I'm gonna be taking my trusty Dijon mustard, definitely need a spoon for that. Can't be scooping things out with a fork. And I am basically just going to clean out my container like so. Now, being that you are using Dijon mustard, you can also use yellow mustard. I've even used mayo. The amazing thing about that is it's already adding flavor into the wet part, so you're really not gonna need to season the wet part. So I'm gonna go ahead and toss that because we are done with this. And you know, if you have a little leftover, it tastes good, right? So you're gonna go ahead and you're just gonna whisk this until it gets to a consistency that is smooth and it looks like all the egg and the mustard is combined. So that's only gonna take like maybe a minute. And it's easier to use a fork, and I like to use the fork because I'm actually gonna be using the fork later on when I'm taking the salmon in and out of the wet mixture. So it should look like so, which is basically just a yellow, liquidy, gold consistency, and it is beautiful. So now we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna talk dry ingredients. So let's go ahead and get the wet and the dry out of the way so that way we can then talk about the salmon. So for your dry, I have a nice clean, wide bowl here. You're gonna use panko breadcrumbs, and the reason why we're using panko breadcrumbs is because it's less heavier than regular breadcrumbs, and it just adds like a nice little crunch automatically to the salmon as you do it. And then you're gonna be adding in about, I would say a quarter cup of, so we had about a half a cup of panko. Now we're gonna add about a quarter cup of nutritional yeast. And all we're doing with the nutritional yeast is it's just gonna add some, flavor. If you're not comfortable using nutritional yeast, that is totally fine. You are not required to use nutritional yeast. I love the flavor of nutritional yeast, and I think it just adds a little pizzazz to the salmon, and it just offers an additional crunch. So I'm gonna be adding a little bit of cayenne pepper because I like a little bit of heat in my salmon, not too much. We're talking maybe half a teaspoon. And then I'm gonna be adding some paprika. With paprika, you wanna go about maybe a teaspoon. If you like a little more smokiness, you can add a little more. We're gonna be doing about a tablespoon of salt. So just eye that. And then we'll be doing also equal part pepper. So tablespoon salt, tablespoon pepper. And if you're using something like this, like a grinder, I would count maybe like about like 10 or so grinds. I love pepper, so we're gonna keep going. All right, I think that's enough. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and I'm going to just use my hands and I'm just going to mix the dry together. Just make sure everything is completely mixed. And sometimes throughout this process where you're gonna be dipping the salmon into the dry, you might want to shake things up midway through, because sometimes the spices can drop all the way down because they are heavier than the actual flakes. So you just want to make sure that everything is evenly seasoned, and you don't want to have one big chunk of salmon that just has all the cayenne pepper in it. That would be awful. But now that that's done, we're gonna go ahead and set this aside, and we're gonna talk about the salmon. So here I have a nice piece of salmon, roughly a pound, a little over a pound. And the reason why I like to go a little over a pound is because when I'm gonna be cutting it and then I cook it, you have water, you have a little bit of fat, and so as you cook any protein, you're gonna be losing a little bit of that. And then it should equal an even pound for each. But because I'm only making this for myself, I'm only gonna be using half of the fillet. So I'm gonna be cutting this right down the middle. Now with this, if you notice, as I picked up my board, I put a paper towel underneath, and that's just so that way I can grip the board as I'm cutting my salmon. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut my salmon lengthwise down, but let's talk about salmon really quick. Now, depending on where you shop, your salmon can either come already skinned and deboned, and I usually get mine at the grocery store that's already done, and it's usually like sealed in a plastic tray. But if you go to a store where you have a fishmonger or somebody who's a fish expert and they have salmon with the skin on, you can ask them to remove the skin, because we definitely don't want to eat the skin with this particular dish. So you can definitely have that done. But if you can find salmon that has the skin already removed, you're good to go. So here I have my fillet. So I cut my big fillet into smaller fillets, so I cut it in half. And now what I'm gonna be doing is I'm gonna be cutting that half of a fillet into another half. So I'm gonna be cutting it into a quarter, down the middle like so. And you wanna make sure that as you are cutting your salmon and cubing it like you would chicken nuggets, that your cubes are not too big. We wanna make sure that these cook evenly. You don't wanna have one raw and one overcooked. So you wanna try to make them as cooked as possible. Now, if you are getting salmon from the grocery store and you start to cut it and then you notice that there's like little pin bones, you can go ahead and just pick it out if you can, or you can use little tweezers and you can just pull it out if you have fish tweezers. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll just take a paper towel and then I'll cut it right out, but sometimes I can get really lucky and I'm not gonna need it, but I think I'm gonna need to get a paper towel for this one. So all you just do is you take a paper towel, has really good grip, and you're just gonna find that pin bone, and then you're gonna just take that paper towel, pinch that pin bone against the paper towel, and just remove if you don't have tweezers. Sometimes it takes a little convincing for the bone to come out, but once you have it out, you are good to go. So that is all taken care of. So now look at that beautiful quarter fillet. So we're gonna go ahead and cut them into about 1/2 inch cubes. So like so, we're looking something like that, something that we can easily put in the wet and then mix around in the dry. And then once we are done doing that, we're gonna go ahead and just immediately transfer them to the air fryer tray. Now, if you notice behind me, I have my air fryer. If you have your favorite brand, use that one at home. You don't need to buy the one that I have. That was the one that I got when I moved in here. And I actually do enjoy it. I love it a lot. I use it for a lot of things. And if you don't have an air fryer, you can easily put this in an oven. Just make sure that you put your oven at a very high temperature as you do this, as if you were, cooking French fries in an oven, essentially. All right, so that's good to go. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go ahead and switch out my fork for my spoon, and I'm gonna go ahead and take these fillets, and I'm gonna go ahead and just put them in the wet, just like so. And like I said, you don't need your wet to be too wet. You don't need it to be too loose. You want it to be able to coat the salmon. So if I can actually, I'm gonna try and get a nice little visual here. So this is what the coating should look like when you take your salmon out of the wet. So it's gonna look like that. You're gonna see some yellow in it. It's gonna change a little bit of the color, but it's nice and thoroughly coated. And then we're gonna go ahead and just transfer it into the dry, just like that. So I like to take just a few. We obviously want to be time savers, so you don't want to just do one at a time. So I'll do about 3 to 4 pieces. I want to leave enough room so I can actually play with the crust, and then that way I can press the crust onto the salmon, and that way the salmon can really take that crust, and the crust will adhere to the wet surface. So just a couple taps, press, press, press. Like so. And this is fun if you have kids and you just want to get them involved. I always was in the school of thought, having been a teacher, that if you involve kids and give them some sort of stake in something that they're making, no pun intended, but give them something to invest in, like the cooking process, whether it's just them coating the salmon or putting them in the air fryer bowl. What it does is it gets them so involved that they'll enjoy eating that food. And even if it's a new item, if you're trying to get your kids to enjoy salmon or like fish in general, you can do this recipe with any fish that you want to explore with your kids. I usually recommend something that's a little heartier and fattier, not something so flaky after it cooks. But this is just going to allow them to really enjoy getting involved and eating something new if they've never tried it. So now that these are coated, I'm gonna go ahead and grab my air fryer tray. Let's go ahead and move the salmon out of the way. Thank you, sir. I appreciate you. You did your job. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna spray the tin like so. Even though it is nonstick, I always like to use a little bit of spray. Not too much. And then what I'll do is I will take my coated salmon pieces and I will be putting them in the tray. And I'm just gonna go ahead and repeat this over and over until I'm done with everything in this bowl. And then I'm gonna go ahead and pop it in my air fryer. All right, so now that we are done assembling our nuggets, I've gone ahead and placed them inside of the air fryer. Don't need them slipping around, but what we're gonna also do is now spray just the top of all of the nuggets. And you can go as liberal or as light as you'd like. I like using a coconut oil spray. It just allows me to have more control rather than like pouring oil on top. And I do love the flavor that coconut oil does give. So I like to use that, but you can use anything that you have, Pam or any regular cooking spray that you have in your pantry. So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna place this in our air fryer. So what I've done is I've placed it on the French fry setting, which takes my air fryer to 400 degrees, and it goes for about 20 to 22 minutes. So what I will do is halfway through, I'll go ahead and I'll flip my salmon nuggets, and I will spray them again to make sure that they are nice and crispy on the other side. If you don't have an air fryer, what you can do is you can put your oven to about 400 degrees or 410 depending on your oven, and you're gonna go ahead and lay them flat on a non-stick aluminum foil tray, and then spray them as you would, as I did in the air fryer, and then you're gonna go ahead and bake them for 10 minutes on each side. I do recommend that you place it as close to the flame as possible, because what that's gonna do is it's gonna allow you to get that nice crunch and that crisp. But 400 to 410 degrees in your oven, 10 minutes per side, and in 20 minutes, you will have crispy, delicious salmon nuggets. All right, so now that our salmon nuggets have cooked for 20 minutes, I flipped them halfway through and sprayed them with a little bit of coconut oil. They're now done and ready to serve. So I'm gonna go ahead and transfer them over into my bowl. You can go ahead and you can place this on a salad, or you can just make a side dish. You can have some French fries, add your favorite dipping sauces. Sometimes I like to make these into like my buffalo salmon nuggets. So I'll be putting some buffalo sauce on top. But honestly, they are perfect as is. If you are not a fan of any dipping sauces and you just want to eat this by itself, you can absolutely do that. But I just want to show you, like, look at that browning. Look at how brown, it looks like you literally just fried them. And you did not, and they're not greasy. And I just want you to just listen to this crunch. Just check this out really quick. Crunch factor, 10 out of 10. Honestly, this recipe never fails me every time I make it. In fact, it gets better and better every time I make it. So, you seriously need to try this recipe out. I honestly hope that you enjoyed this episode of Cooking with Coach, and hopefully there are more to come. But go get your hands on some salmon nuggets, because these things are wild. Have a good one.